Hello, everyone, and welcome to the conversation. Today, I am joined by my friend and high school counselor, Maureen Costello. Thanks for joining us today, Maureen.
Yeah, hello. Thanks for having me.
Of course, welcome. So, I want to start off and hear how you first became interested in the mental health field in general.
Oh, that's a good question. Um, I'm trying to dig back down to my interview,
There's
responses for when I'm like at first job interviewing, right? Like, how did you get involved in this field? Um, so when I was younger, I had no clue what I wanted to do. I liked school a lot. I loved high school. I was involved in a lot of stuff, a lot of random things, but I didn't have a very specific like passion. But I took a lot of sociology and psychology classes, and I just loved being around people. And I mean, the world is run by people, and you're you're gonna, no matter what you do, you're forced to interact with people, right? And I just found the psychology idea of trying to understand people and their motives and why people do the things that they do super interesting. So I was just like, you know what? Why not study psychology in college? And then I dabbled in a little bit of research in undergrad, and I hated it. So then I realized I wanted to do more hands-on type stuff with psychology. So like actually working with people one-on-one. I did a little bit of teaching. I taught bowling classes in college and I hated teaching. So I was like, okay, now I know that I like working with people, but I don't want to do big groups of people. I want to just work one-on-one with people. And so I started like researching social work, counseling, school counseling. And I did a little internship in undergrad with a high school counselor in the city that I went to undergrad in, and I loved it. I just really, really liked how every day was different. You interact with so many different students. I also love teenagers. I think they're much easier to talk to than elementary students and middle schoolers. I think they have a more developed brain, so it's easier to talk to them, and they also have more empathy, so it's easier to kind of get them to see different perspectives on things and walk them through certain scenarios to help them figure out different situations that they find themselves in. But yeah, I also like the idea of, to be completely honest, I like the idea of working in education. I like the lifestyle that it provides also. I'm not working 9 to 5, I'm working 7 to 3, and I get all my holidays off. So it just also is enjoyable because of that, to be completely honest. I think there's a lot of pressure on kids to figure out it. What?
Oh, no, I was just saying right on.
Sorry, what'd you say? Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of pressure to like on kids to find their passion. And so I'm like totally transparent with them where it's like, yeah, find something that you like, but also think about the kind of lifestyle you want to live.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that makes
but yeah, that's kind of my spiel. Sorry.
Oh, you're fine. I'm wondering if we have a little bit of a lag. Hopefully not, but maybe the Zoom connection will pick back up. When you had been like considering a career in the mental health field, did you have any like initial concerns or fears? And if you did, what were they?
Yeah, it's actually really funny. The first thing that I think of is back in high school when senior year, when everyone's talking about what they're going to study in college, and everyone was like, oh, like I'm thinking about psychology. But I heard that once you take like diagnosis and you hear about all the diagnoses, you start to think that you have those yourself and stuff. So that was just like a silly like high school rumor that I immediately thought of when you asked me that question. But yeah, totally. I mean, I think one of the bigger fears was when I was applying to grad school, was I'm straight out of undergrad. I'm 22 years old. I have like zero life experience. How am I supposed to sit down with someone who is in their most vulnerable state and sharing really intimate details of their life, whether traumatic or not, how am I going to have enough credibility to sit there and, I don't know, I think a lot of people assume that you give advice, which is like not what you do. You don't give advice. And I think that helped me a lot because I'm like, well, I'm not giving advice. Like you're just sitting with someone in a very through a difficult time, and you're holding a space for them to share those things. So I think that's what helped me kind of overcome that fear. I still think I have working with students and working with families, I still get that insecurity of, well, who the hell are you? You don't have any children. How are you to tell me that how I'm supposed to handle my teenager? Right. So I still have those flares of insecurity that come up with that. But I think that's with any job that I would have gone into, and anything that you're first starting out in, especially too. I mean, in order to gain experience, you have to start doing it. So
100%. You kind of talked through like the process you went through when you were figuring out, that you wanted to be a counselor or work in the mental health field. Did you have like one specific aha moment where you're like, yes, this is definitely it. This is definitely what I want to pursue? Or was it more kind of like a slow build to pointing you in that direction?
that's a good question. I've never thought about that. Um, I think it was mostly a slow build. When I was describing it, like my experience of like, okay, I know I want to work with people. I know I want to do hands-on stuff. I don't want to do research. And then I know I want to work one-on-one with people. It kind of was a gradual thing. I kind of like chipped away at it slowly. The last couple of years of undergrad. I don't think there was a really aha moment. I think I just was excited to go to my internship. I didn't dread it. I was excited to, every day was so different. In a school, you're working as a school counselor, you're working in a lot, like mostly 3 different domains. So academic, social, emotional, and college and career. So your meetings with students can go from really exciting to really low, and then vice versa too. And I like it. I like the differences in days, and the new challenges that come up too, with all the different students that you're meeting and all the different situations and life experiences that they're going through. It really, there's never like, no 2 days are the same.
Yeah, I can imagine. Um, how long have you been in the workforce?
So this is my second year as a counselor. Um, it's been oh 2 years. I haven't had a normal 2 years since, because my first year, the pandemic hit in March. So I always joke with my coworkers that I don't even know what it's like to be a school counselor, because I haven't had a normal year. But I interned for a full year before that. So I consider like myself having like 3 years of experience, but
Right on.
yeah.
Um, when you kind of came into this, how did you envision that, your work through being a high school counselor would kind of help change the world?
Whew.
Big question.
That's a that's a good
The hard
question.
hitter.
Yeah. Changing the world. Damn. I am pretty hard on myself. And I mean, I'm my own worst critic, but I think that I remind myself often that if I can impact one of my students' days in a positive way, um, then I did my job, even in the smallest way. Then I walked away feeling like, okay, I did my job. I impacted someone's day. And that's what I like about working with so many different people. So for me, it's not necessarily like changing the world, but I think that those small pieces create that domino effect.
Absolutely.
And that student will go off and hopefully impact someone else's day. And then, and so on. I also do really like working within, one of the worst parts of my job and one of the best parts of my job is working within the system of education. Um, it is really tough to work within a system that has been, the US education system has been around for a very, very long time. And when you feel like you don't necessarily have any power over the choices that schools or districts make. But I also love working within the systems where I can advocate for my students' needs or my family's needs, where I do have power to make certain changes or settle impacts to help change or benefit their life in some way. When I think of systemic change, I think of a lot of things. It's a huge umbrella of things, but I also think of programming that's not reactive but proactive. So I think a lot of times people think school counselors are reactive, and it's just, you just sit in your office and wait for a crying kid to come in to see you for help. Where I think a lot of people don't understand is that school counselors do a lot of programming for schools for social emotional learning, anti-bullying and anti-bias curriculum that go out through like homeroom lessons and seminar lessons is what we call it, or just classrooms in general, right? So we try to spend most of our time doing direct services with students, but we also work on making sure that we're creating those systemic lessons like social emotional learning and anti-bullying and anti-bias work too. So our students are walking away learning those things as well, which is in nature and naturally preventative, because our hope is that our students are building and learning those skills on their own, so we don't have to teach them after the fact if something negative happens in their life. I hope that makes sense.
That's really like comforting to hear as someone who's not in high school and has no children. But
Yeah.
I don't know. It's great to feel like, hearing that just
Yeah.
feels at least some sort of confidence that like change can be made with the proactive versus reactive mentality. I really like that.
Totally. And I think that was very energizing for me in grad school when I was learning about that too, because I didn't necessarily know that before I was taking like social school counseling classes in grad school, right?
Yeah.
But I'm also not the expert. And that is the ultimate goal, right? Is that systemic change in that pro social emotional learning, but it looks so different across the nation, and so different across districts and just across schools also, depending on like your administration and who's in power and who is ultimately making these decisions on what goes on in the schools. So
For
yeah.
sure. I know you mentioned that obviously like your first real year in the force uh, is during a pandemic year, which is
Mm-hmm.
comes with a slew of its own challenges. What would you say,
Yeah.
outside of maybe topics or issues that pertain to the past year specifically, what would you say are some of the common challenges that kind of face today's teens?
Outside of, I'm sorry, did you say outside of like the pandemic?
Yeah, kind of
Okay.
outside some of the more like in general terms speaking, outside of the topics and happenings of the past year, let's say, what do you
Mm-hmm.
think are some of the general topics? And even though I'm sure a lot of the discussions that are held do have to do with current happenings, obviously that makes perfect sense. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what are some other topics that you
Yeah.
imagine would be common topics both prior and post like pandemic and 2020 2021 world?
Yeah. So I really like that question. I do want to preface my answer by saying that the population that I work with is majority white and a upper middle class population. So my answers are going to be mostly reflective of the population that I work with, and not necessarily all across the board or all across the state or district even,
Yeah, thank
that I work in.
that is
Yeah, yeah, of
important
course.
information. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so I think, I interned in um a way different population than I am currently working at. And so the issues that came up were way different, which was really interesting and also a strong learning curve for me. So um, I'm, when you're working with students who have low socioeconomic status and that come from families that are first generation, these students are first generation college students, so they don't necessarily know how to begin thinking about life after high school, or I mean, not necessarily life after high school, but college specifically, if their families didn't go to school. So that was a big, creating access to for students of color, for students of lower socioeconomic status. So those concurrent enrollment classes, bring in concurrent enrollment, which is high school classes that offer them college credit if they pass. So already starting them out from college with, or from already they're graduating high school with college credit already. And then like even besides having the college credit under their belt, they're building that self-efficacy. Like, I can take college classes. I can handle this. I can do this. Because being a first generation college student, you come in with, not everyone, but generalizing, you come in with fears of, I mean, there's so much that goes into it, but money is a huge thing, access, and then also just like the not necessarily understanding it completely because your parents didn't go through it, right? So the population that I currently work with now, I think I've had 2 students who are first generation students out of all of my students that I've worked with. And so majority of my students who I work with, their parents have gone to college, their grandparents went to college, their older siblings have gone off to college. So they know how it works. They know the process. They already have an idea. They've been thinking about this since birth. And it's a lot smoother of a process for them, if you will. However, on the other hand, with the population that I work with, it is an upper middle class population, and their parents and their community and their peers all add this pressure to them to apply to these really prestigious schools, take a million AP classes so you can cure cancer by the time you turn 16. Like, that's the joke we have, is that, oh, these kids just want to cure cancer. Like, their parents want them to cure cancer by the time they turn 16, right? So because they want them in all these AP classes, they want them to be in the top, like the top rank of their class, right? Top percentage of their class. And there's just so much comparison that goes on that like is slowly killing these kids because they're comparing themselves to their peers. They're hearing the way that their parents talk about their accomplishments, and just comparing it. Parents are on Facebook sharing their kids' accomplishments with all their community to see and to hear. And I mean, that puts so much pressure on these kids to just know exactly what they want to do, have a solid plan, and get into an Ivy League school, which is just an insane amount of pressure. So there's just it's so different. And it's not to say one struggle is more difficult than the other. They're definitely both, and like they're just 2 sides of the spectrum. And I mean, there's a lot of people in between that spectrum as well. But
For sure.
That's kind of one of the big things that comes to my mind when working with two different populations. So,
Can you, I mean, obviously I picked up bits and pieces from your description and in working with students
mhm,
at the school you did your internship with.
mhm.
What was, can you just give us high level, like you sort of just described high level, the demographic of your current students? Can you just high level give the demographic of what the students were at your
Yes.
internship year?
Yeah, so my internship, it was an inner city school. So it was lower socioeconomic status, and I think between 80 and 90% Latinx population.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm really glad that you touched on that. And it's cool that you've gotten to at least experience like a bit of contrast and hear like that there are very clear differences in some of the,
Mhm,
you know, the challenges. It sounded like your first school was more the proactive side was more like helping out with resources and access to resources for
mhm,
students who are maybe first generation looking to go to college, versus the school you're working at now, which is I believe you said higher middle class, um,
mhm,
high percentage Caucasian demographic whose proactive
mhm,
struggles are more in line with kind of the pressures they're facing coming from
mhm.
within their family, right? And probably pressure within themselves to
Oh yeah.
achieve greatness in a sense. So, can you speak to kind of like, I know you're saying you guys are doing a lot of proactive stuff. Can you speak to sort of the reactive side of that for both of those
Yeah.
demographics that you experienced? Like what sort of issues, if many or any, came up um, that were more on the reactive side?
Yeah. So for a lot of my students that I have worked with over the past year and a half, 2 years, the pressure has come up often and frequently, which has turned into a lot of suicidal ideation and a lot of suicide risk assessments being done. So that is more of the reaction side, right? So
Mhm.
a student will come in upset, and it leads to evaluating their risk of suicide or any suicidal thoughts that they may be having. And a lot of it is the pressure that they put on themselves, right? After having conversations with parents, a lot of the times they're like, I don't know where this comes from. We always encourage them to do what they want, do what they like, don't take so many classes. Um, and I don't, it's hard to know what's
Really going on.
yeah, right. And it's in I think it's also a cultural and systemic issue within our community, right? Even if your parents aren't putting pressure on you to be the number one in your class, you see your friends being competitive academically. You see your friends' parents maybe putting pressure on their kids. You see the school really highlighting these merit-based students. Um,
It's like a generational pressure,
yeah,
really. So even if
yeah,
they're not getting it from inside their family, like they're still spending time with their friends and they're at their friends' house. I mean, maybe not so much in pandemic year, but
yeah.
they're around their friends and their friends' families. And like you said, that is actually not surprising to hear.
Well, and it's also, even if parents are not thinking that they are putting pressure on their kid, you subliminally, kids hear the way you talk about them, right? Like you hear like you celebrating the grades, celebrating the A's, celebrating the 100%, celebrating these awards that you get, right? But they're not necessarily celebrating the progress or the journey that they're on or the difficult steps of like, wow, you overcame something really difficult. Let's celebrate that. And
Mhm.
you did that, you figured that out all on your own, right? It sounds very elementary, but those are the kinds of you pick up on that as a kid, as a teenager, and that even if you're consciously not doing that, as a consciously not um, or even unconsciously not like putting pressure on your kid to get into an Ivy League school, they pick up on cues that the schools give them, the awards that the students receive, their friends receive, the praise that the parents give them. So it's not necessarily like something that has to be done intentionally, or um, it can be very subliminal, right? Or indirect. But kids are smart and they pick up on those things, right? I think we're all social and behavioral beings. We learn by watching others and by hearing others, and those things get picked up on.
Yeah. That makes
More so than we'd like to admit, I think. So
a lot more. What
yeah.
about the other demographic of students that you've had? What are some of their more reactional issues?
Um I'm trying to think back as
Years ago now, yeah.
yeah. I think it was a lot of the time attendance concerns that I'm thinking of, like really, really trying hard to get them re-engaged in school.
Mhm.
I think if you have barriers that you're constantly having to overcome, um, in a world that maybe doesn't tell you or encourage you to, or show you options, or you don't see representation there, that college is an option, and that these really there's some, I don't know, I guess just having more options than you think, then you don't have buy-in to what the US education system is offering, right? I think for those students, it was often, for that population, it was often um, here really trying to push, like, here are all your options. You have so many options. You don't have to go straight into the workforce after high school. You could go to trade schools. You could get a certificate in something. You could go to community college, or you can go to a 4-year college. There are, I think financially, that pushed a lot of students away. That was the financial burden and hurdle of college is very scary and very intimidating. And I think that was one of the biggest I guess, guards to seeing that life, or seeing that like future as possible, right? Um, and also, if your family or siblings haven't done it, I think a lot of time you just assume that that's not something that, if you haven't grown up around it, it's not something that you necessarily consider, which is really like simplified version of what actually like goes on in a student's head. But um yeah, it was a lot of like, let's get you, to take these concurrent enrollment classes. I want you to challenge yourself in these AP classes. I want you to keep attending school, because it serves a bigger purpose
Yeah.
than just, sometimes, especially with low socioeconomic populations, you might be working as a student a lot more than just a part-time job,
Yeah.
to help fund things at home, that the students that I currently work with don't think twice about. Um, and
Don't have to, right?
yeah, and if you're making money as a teenager, why would, and you don't see it ever ending, or the cycle of um like poverty ending, why would you go into debt to go to college? And
Right.
why would you stay in school if you can work now and make money? Right. And that's not everyone. That's like, I mean, that's just one thought, but and these are all like huge generalizations. So
Well, I think it's
Um,
really important to even hear high level some of that and the differences. And
yeah.
I, I do think we could probably go down a rabbit hole and have a whole conversation about the reasoning behind those differences, but that's not what this interview is about. So
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah. Sorry.
no, no, you don't have to be sorry at all. I'm actually really glad we talked about that because
Yeah.
that is that is so important.
Yeah.
And I think people
I
need to
can.
hear and understand that. And there are real reasons behind it that go beyond
Mhm.
the individual level. So
Mhm. Yes.
now I want to ask about some of the issues for, and I think now that we understand you've had experience with both demographics, I think it is important to hear about both, about some of the issues that do pertain to happenings since 2020 hit. And I
Mm,
imagine those conversations would revolve around, of course, COVID-19, um, the Black Lives Matter movement, and just our institutionalized racism within the country in general. Um, I'm sure depression has increased due to all of the changes in environment. Um,
mhm.
we had a really big presidential election, so the political landscape. Um, I mean, are those right? Do those topics come up, or like what other conversations are being held around the happenings of the past, year plus?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think those are all things that have come up in different ways and through like different dynamics throughout the year. Um, but I also think um, one of the biggest things that we have seen most recently is cyberbullying and online etiquette. Because our students have been remote and trying to connect with each other in through online
Mm.
because they can't necessarily see each other. Um, we've seen a lot of students connect. Right, they're using their social media apps to connect, um, and in healthy ways, but also in unhealthy ways as well. So we've seen a huge jump in reports with like online bullying and people targeting people on social media. Um, and so we've been trying to get some. We actually just did a cyberbullying lesson and hate speech lesson. So that also has to do with with like Black Lives Matter movement, teaching our kids about hate speech, and that what you say online stays there, and there are other people behind the screen. And although what you say may stick with you for like 30 seconds, what you say would stick to the other person for a long time who's behind that, who's on the receiving end of what you're saying, right? So being very conscientious about what you're saying online, especially because social media is such a big part. Even before the pandemic, social media has been a big part of um, these teens' lives, but even more so now, right? With TikTok and everyone's connecting online because of the pandemic remotely. um, you just see a giant increase in their usage and their communicating with each other, whether healthy or unhealthy. So that's been an interesting topic that I thought I'd add to your list.
Wow, yeah, that's actually something I hadn't even thought. I mean, in general, I know that cyberbullying is a thing, but I like hadn't really considered how that might
Mhm.
increase at this time. Is that a pretty big issue for, well, I guess you can't speak to the the first demographic you worked with because you haven't been with them through this. So
Yeah, I can't really, I don't really, I mean, I know, we have been, it's also interesting because there's so much politics in school districts. In our school district, being in a very wealthy area, our parents have a lot of say in what, and not to say that the parents in inner city districts don't have say in what goes on or the choices that are made. But in our community, which is predominantly white and upper middle class, we do have some people who don't necessarily believe that there's a pandemic going on. And so there's been a huge push for our kids to be in person. So while we have been hybrid, we started out hybrid this year. We went remote once we had breakouts happen. We had like 2 high level numbers of cases of COVID. And then we stayed remote for a while. Then we came back to hybrid. Then we went we went fully in person after spring break. And then we went remote 2 weeks because we had more breakouts. And now we're back fully in person. So it's just been like whiplash. Whereas I think other districts have been a little bit more consistent across the board. I think where I interned, they have been remote like for the majority of the year.
Yeah.
But I actually don't know if they are doing hybrid right now. I imagine that they are probably doing hybrid or in person now, but there was more consistency, I think, with the district's policies because there was a huge push for ours to be fully in person right out the gate, which didn't happen, but yeah.
Still the pressure there. Mm-hmm. So I want to ask, like, when students come to you with really tough questions that you maybe don't have the answers to, or maybe questions that kind of trip you up or feel beyond your expertise or just beyond you in general, how do you deal with that? How do you respond?
It's a really good question. It depends on what the scenario is. I think this goes back to the sometimes view of a school counselor is always giving advice, right? And guidance, right? We're not guidance counselors. That's a very old term, which was coined like when school counselors were the people who sat in their office drinking the coffee, reading the newspaper until a crying kid came in, and then they sat with that crying kid, right? But we're school counselors, so we work in areas that are both reactive and proactive. But back to your question, sorry, I had to go on a little rant there, but I think what's most important is, depending on the situation, but overall, what's most important is just if they are coming to me with a concern that they're unsure of, that they're having a really hard time and they haven't been able to talk to anyone about it, what's most important is acknowledging that and just sitting with them with that, and sitting with the fear of uncertainty and uncomfiness and the unknowing. I always tell my students that they are the expert of their own lives. I am not an expert. I lost my train of thought. But they are the expert in their own lives. And I think as a counselor, I try to reflect back on how they're feeling, right? And just try to relate to that initial feeling. And then we walk through, we walk through different scenarios. If they're trying to figure out how to handle a certain scenario, it's okay, well, how are you feeling about this scenario first? What's the core feeling, right? Is this scenario making you scared? Is it making you sad? Is it making you angry? And then walking through different scenarios. So acknowledging whatever that they're going through, sitting with them through that uncomfortableness with them. Because I mean, depending on the scenario, a lot of these, sometimes, I'll be the first person that they tell things to. Um, and
Yeah.
how heavy and how hard is it, especially with someone, I mean, how many times did you meet your school counselor, like in high school? Because I only met with my school counselor like twice,
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe.
right? Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And I can't even remember her name, to be honest. And so I think just making sure that my door is always open and making them feel like I'm not a disciplinary at all. Um, I'm never, but there are limits to the confidentiality, right? I can't always keep things between me and my student, for their own benefit and for their own safety. But yeah, I mean, there's those situations come up like every day that I don't know how to respond to. I'm not an expert at all. I don't know shit, right? So it really is just being a human and being as transparent as possible with them, because I think teenagers need more of that transparency in their lives, right? They're being taught certain things in classes, they're being told certain how to be, on social media. They're being told what to do and who to be by their parents. They're being influenced by their peers, and so I think what I try to remind myself is just to be someone who reminds them that they're the expert in their own life, and that we need to sit with what you're going through right now so we can respond and not react,
Yeah,
basically.
that's a really smart response, and I do believe that there's something to that, because no one person, regardless of how tenured you are, and regardless of what you know or don't know about someone, like, you're never going to have all the answers. And
Mhm.
sometimes I think people don't even always need answers. They just need someone to vent to, and to
Yes.
say, to sit in it with them, and to validate their
Yeah.
feelings, and just say, this is shitty. I am so sorry you're going through this. Da 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 da. Like,
Yeah.
we all need that at several moments
There's
throughout our lives.
mm, right. There's nothing worse than like going and like crying to someone about something you're upset about, and they immediately start giving you advice. And you're like, no, no, no. I just literally wanted to cry to you and like to vent to you. I don't want advice. I don't want to do anything about it right
Yeah, I'm not
now. I
looking
just
to
want to be,
make this better. I just want to solve. And
I just,
you
I
need
just want to
help,
be
buddy.
sad right now.
Totally. It's healthy though. I mean, to an extent.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of that job too is teaching them to communicate their needs, right? Because I didn't understand that until I like went through grad school and started doing all this like therapy in grad school, right? Of like, oh, I can tell people that I just want them to sit and listen, and that I don't want advice, right? So part of that is like telling kids like it's okay to ask for what you need and to communicate your needs, right?
For sure.
Um, because being a teenager, you don't have much autonomy, and I don't know, you should have some sort of independent on I mean, I don't know where I'm going with that, but I just feel like feeling like you have control over a lot of, at least some things that you might not necessarily, when you don't necessarily have control over a lot of things going on in the world, is I think what a lot of to sum up what our teenagers are going through is exactly that, actually. Learning how to be able to control figuring out what you do have control over in a world with so much uncertainty
Yeah.
is, I think.
I think that's probably what all humans are going through, right?
Yeah,
Like,
right.
it's not so
Exactly.
different from the grown, the adults. Um,
No, and I tell my students too, I'm like, yeah, like that's something that you are aware of, something that I think a lot of adults aren't even aware of. So pat yourself on the back for that, because I mean, I have so many wise students who are just amazing and
to teach you.
wise beyond their years. Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I learn new things from them all the time.
Um,
So,
what would you say are some of like the most common resources that you provide to students? I guess both your current students and former students. And I mean, take that as generally as you want. Like that can be, oh, I provide them links to resources for grants or student loans or
mhm.
whatever kind of, I mean, I guess just take it however it's best fitted to.
Yeah. I mean, I think I mentioned this earlier. School counselors, the American School Counselor Association, has like 3 domains that school counselors work in. So academic, post grad, college and career planning, and then social emotional. So resources in all 3 of those. Mental health resources for therapists, referrals for parents to inpatient treatments and outpatient treatments for mental health concerns, referrals for tutoring, whether it's standardized testing tutoring or just academic tutoring. And some of these resources we have in our building, right? So I consider myself a resource to my students too. So I'll volunteer to meet with them do weekly check-ins if needed, right? Whether that's like academic or social emotional. And then college and career planning, we have, we meet with them in their junior year in the spring, and then there's the fall of their senior year to help them with any postgraduate planning, whether it's college, career, trade, military, whatever pathway they are interested in. We do 2 post-grad, like 45-minute long meetings to kind of go over any tools and resources that they might need as well. So
I
it's a big umbrella of resources.
I mean, hearing all those resources, it really just bums me out that I did not take advantage of my
Right?
counselors like I should in high school. Like I so was just not prepared for the future. And I didn't care
No,
at that point in time. I wasn't putting any effort in, but now I look back and I'm
because you're a teenager.
like, what were you doing?
You're right. Like, unless you have someone breathing down your back, like you need to meet with your counselor to get all of these good resources, or unless I am like proud at how our school does, like you have to advertise your counseling department to students, right? Because we have a TikTok, we have an Instagram, we try to advertise it to our students to be like, come see us because we have resources you can utilize,
Hold
right?
on, hold on. Did you just tell me that you and your fellow school counselors have your own TikTok?
Yes, we do.
Do you do now? I'm embarrassed to admit, but I recently got on the TikTok train, which if people are watching this through social media, they already know because they've seen my cringeworthy videos. But,
They're not cringeworthy, they're amazing.
you're so sweet. What are you guys doing the dances? What are you like? What is going on this TikTok? Just a quick
Great
one
question.
minute download.
We're definitely not doing dances yet. That was an idea. Okay, so we started the TikTok when we first went remote in March of last year because we were like, okay, how are we going to engage with our students? Because so many of them just like fell off our radar because we're trying to email them basically instead of, when we're in school, we can send them a pass and just pull them from class. But
Yeah.
we're trying to email them, call their parents, and their parents are busy working and stuff like that. So it's just, um, it was our attempt to engage our population of students, right? We're like, okay, they're spending time on social media because they're remote learning, they're at home. Let's put ourselves on social media.
Meet them where
And
they're
so first, yeah. So I think we're trying to be funny, but I'm sure it comes off as cringeworthy. I mean, I think we're hilarious, but I'm actually the one that puts the videos together, and so I will like spend hours putting this shit together outside of work hours, of course. But like, it is
On the clock, on the clock.
yeah, right. I'm like, I should be getting paid overtime for this shit. No, I think it started like in the I'm trying to look through to see what videos I can reference, but the first one was literally just a video slideshow of pictures of us on our Google Meets and Zooms being like, come meet with us, hang out with us, we miss you, because it was when we first went remote and all of our students like fell off the radar because they're like, cool, school's out for the summer, basically, right?
Yeah.
And so it's us, the slideshow of pictures of us on our Google Meets, like with the song Can We Just Talk on it. So I think we're pretty funny. And then there's other information, like when colleges started going test optional, we posted like a resource, like another resource for our students to check to see what colleges went test optional for that year. And then we just have some other random, the most recent one has the most likes and the most views. It has over 400 likes and over 4,000 views. So I'm practically a TikTok famous.
Wow.
It it is a compilation of us in our offices we're mocking our Gen Z students, basically. We are using Gen Z slang and trying to sound cool, and it's really cringy, but I enjoyed making it. And some of our students commented on it and they were like, that phrase was used wrong. So we're like, sorry.
They're educating you.
Yeah, they are.
I feel like now I'll have to give you guys a follow. You'll have to share your TikTok with me.
Yeah, I will send my TikTok to you.
I love that. I want to shift just like a little bit for the end here and talk about you and how this pertains to you, and sort of get an idea, just like a peek on the individual level of what goes on for mental health workers in general. And the understanding that you obviously have your specific sector and you don't necessarily represent the entire group, but just speak to you. So what is your salary as a counselor? Are you allowed to share?
Yes. My contract is for $42,000 a year.
Does that feel fair to you?
No, it does not.
How can you say that, like, how can you say that if you were to earn a higher salary starting tomorrow, how would that directly change your life?
That's how it would change my life. It would be a big sigh of relief.
So it would just feel like not even like a bonus. It would just feel like you were getting to a good place where you felt like
catch my breath.
That's interesting. And I didn't mean to put words to your reaction.
No.
I'm trying to regurgitate what I perceive.
You're reflecting. You're reflecting. You're doing what a counselor does.
Yeah. I think that, I mean, we don't need to talk much more about that, but I do think that in general, I mean, I think a lot of psychiatrists and therapists sometimes can be paid really well, but I feel like everyone else.
I think.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I know. I think you have a point, right? You can make a lot of money in the mental health field, right? If you are a doctor of psychology, if you are a psychiatrist, you can do really well in private practice. And I actually do work part-time doing my own private practice to supplement my income, because I don't make enough as a school counselor alone. I also take on a lot of extra responsibilities at school to supplement my income as well. And what I think people don't necessarily realize is the amount of liability that comes with our job. I think a lot of people are like, oh, well, you have like summers off and holidays and things like that. But over the past few holidays, I have had to make CPS reports. I have had to do suicide assessments. It's not a fun holiday when you're calling Child Protective Services or doing a suicide assessment on the student and calling families to give them resources, right? And that's not to say that like ruins, my holidays or ruins or is like the worst part of my job. I just think that the liability that comes with mandatory reporting, risk assessments, whether it's threat or suicide or self-injury, is scary to go home at night and think, did I do everything I needed to do to make sure my student's safe?
Wow.
And then to take that home and then also be like, oh shit, I got to make my student loan payment, or I got to make sure I pay my bills. And do I have enough money for the rest of the month? It sucks and it's hard.
I cannot even imagine. That's actually a really good segue into my next question, which is like, how do you feel that becoming a counselor has affected your mental health?
That's a great question. I It's funny because obviously I preach mental health and preach self-care and preach all these things to my students. Um, it's really hard. It's hard. And it's not easy, and it's scary too. This year, especially, I've been extremely burnt out. I think it's because the expectations of our jobs have stayed the same, just like our expectations of our students have stayed the same, but in the middle of a pandemic and in the middle of transitioning from remote learning to hybrid learning to full in-person learning, back to remote, back to hybrid, things like that. So with having like a million schedule changes and having to pivot like this when things are changing so rapidly, it's exhausting. And I am a person that takes a little bit longer, I think, than an average person, I guess, would say, to adjust and to adapt to change. And I know that about myself. And so I try to give myself grace and compassion, but it's really hard when there's a lot of pressure on you from the school district or from parents who are like, my child is failing this class. I need you to do something about it. And it's like, well, I am also struggling right now. And right. And it's like, that's not necessarily, it's hard trying to pivot to, it's all relative, right? If a student is failing a class and they view it and their family views it as a crisis, to them it's a crisis. So it's hard to pivot those perspectives, and it's hard to pivot from, the pandemic is a crisis. The shooting that happened in Boulder is a crisis. An F in ninth grade geometry, not really. It's hard to have. It's just been really hard to have empathy this year.
Wow.
Is all with a lot that's going on in the world. And it sucks to admit that, and it sucks to feel that. And so that's where I have been trying to take care of myself and step away and work less. But this year we've just been working more and more, and especially with the amount of money that I don't make, I've had to take on extra responsibilities to supplement that income. So it's hard to step away, right?
Yeah. I think it's really brave to admit that and really honest. So thank you. And I know I'm like laughing throughout this with you, but it's actually not funny at all. Um,
Right.
it's really not.
It's no, and it's you have to laugh at it, right? I mean, I think it's like so crazy that I'm like, how is this a thing? But it's also not super surprising with the way this country is.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. The hard to find empathy for more of the kind of everyday issues when we've been experiencing issues that are far greater than the individual level
Mhm.
necessarily lately. Um, so I wanted to ask, do you see a therapist currently?
Not currently, but I have seen multiple therapists in different stages of my life. Um, I have like a pattern I've noticed is that I tend to see or seek support in times of transition.
Oh,
Um, yeah. So, like going through graduate school, and then after graduate school, just like are those two main areas of um, when I sought the most mental health support, which is like it was. I mean, I've been very lucky that I've had access to mental health support, and I've also been very fortunate that um, I've had the first um, time that I have reached out to a therapist, I have really connected with them because that's not always the case. You don't always connect with the first therapist that you see, which can make that hurdle of seeking support even more difficult and exhausting. And so I've also had that fortunate experience of really clicking with the first therapist that connect that I've met with. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Um, what would you say is your through line through the hard times? Like maybe the one or two things that you try and remember. I mean, granted, I'm sure every day can be hard, and in general for a counselor, in general for a mental health worker, and that's just kind of tenfold and beyond now and this past year.
Mhm.
But what are kind of the things you keep close to your heart or try and remind yourself of as your through line when you are just at your wits end?
That's a good question too. Um, I think when I'm having really hard days and I'm feeling a lot of pressure from our community or from the school district, I or I'm feeling like overwhelmed with the amount of support that I am not able to give. Um, my coworkers have been a massive support system for me, and they are just amazing humans, and I laugh with them, I cry with them. I just like align so much with my counseling team. And I think I didn't even mention that in the beginning of your first question when like thinking about where how I got into school counseling was I love working with people on a team. I don't like being alone on an island where I feel solely responsible for things because I like to consult. I like getting different perspectives, and I also know I don't know everything. Um, and my team, and so that's what I think led me to a high school as well, because there's usually more counselors at a high school than there are in an elementary school or middle school.
Yeah.
And I mean, I love going to work every day because of the people that I work with, not only because of my students, but because my coworkers they're just so great.
Mhm.
I can consult to them about everything, anything. And yeah. And they don't take things so seriously too, which pulls me out of that um, very critical side of myself when I'm being critical of myself. So, um, I mean, they're a bunch of counselors, so they're validators naturally.
You're all just counseling each other nonstop about
Yeah.
personal lives and all the combining and interweb. Um,
Yeah.
so I want to kind of wrap up here, but I want to ask a couple pieces of advice to the counselor who doesn't give that much advice apparently. What piece of advice would you give to someone who is maybe at a point right now where they're considering mental health work or becoming a counselor
Hmm.
as their career?
Oh, so okay, so not necessarily. Sorry, I thought you were going in a different direction with that correct with that question. Not considering seeking mental health support, but seeking a career in mental health.
Yes.
Okay. Um. Yeah, I'm stumped. I don't give advice. I think that I think a lot. There's so many things going through my head right now. Um,
Limit it to one or two things.
okay. It is the most rewarding. If you're considering going into a mental health field, I assume that you are someone who likes to work with other people, right? And it is the most rewarding feeling when you connect with someone who is going through a really difficult time and they feel extremely validated in something or they feel understood. I think I want people to feel like they are understood. So I think that's not even advice. I'm totally like went off on
Well, I think that's advice in the sense of like if you're considering moving down this route, like this is the most fulfilling part of it. So like
yes, this is the most
if
fulfilling
that
part.
feels
This
like
is my
something,
through line. I literally
yes,
answered your last question.
full circle, baby.
um, I I think I guess my advice would be prepared to get to know yourself on a whole other level in graduate school.
Mm.
Because if you're not willing to do the work yourself, then you cannot ask your clients.
Wow, that. Look at you with that advice. I feel like that's great advice.
I mean, that's just advice that I've stolen from my professors. So
Well, take
all of my little like one liners are from other people that I've just stolen and put in my back pocket to use
you
for
know
later.
what?
So
I
you're
feel
welcome
like
for that one.
the smartest people learn from other smart people, and that's how they become smart. So
I
that's my
agree.
advice.
Yeah, I mean that's
Good advice.
right.
Um,
That's why I believe so much in therapy, right? You're learning through relationships with others.
utilize it, people.
Yeah,
Okay,
yes.
last question for you. What advice would you give to youth in general right now who are moving through these
Mm,
challenging times? It's all encompassing, and I know that might be
yeah.
really tricky,
I
but
know, again, I have a lot of things going through my head right now. And I think I'll go back to what we said earlier, right? Is I think it's this overarching theme of feeling like there's so much uncertainty in the world and feeling like you don't have control over your own life with so much uncertainty in the world, in your family, maybe, um, in your future. In your community, whatever it looks like, right? There's this world is full of uncertainty, especially right now. Um, and trying to find those things that you know you can control in your life and hold on to it, because
yeah.
those are the things that are going to pull you through, right? Whether it's how you respond to things that come your way, um, or just focusing on things that fill your bucket and put you in the state of flow, and focusing on things that are going to make your life better in the future, that you'll thank yourself for later. I think it's just like grab onto the things that you know you have control of, um, and find something that you enjoy and run with it. I think for me, that being like connecting with other humans is my MO, and spending time with other people, like quality time with other people, is something that I am extremely passionate about and enjoy. And so trying to connect with other humans in this insane year has been like what I've tried to control in this crazy whirlwind of a year. Even outside of this year, I mean, this world is just insane. So
No doubt, no doubt. That's why thank God for mental health workers. I mean, really.
Well, yes, thank God for them, because mental health workers also need mental health workers.
Absolutely. I mean, we're all gonna die, but we can't get through it alone.
Agreed.
Just to end on a real positive note there.
Yes, yes. I wish our society valued less of the tangible outcomes of things, and more on the intangibles, like connection with other humans. Because that's where that's kind of where I fit in this world. I'm definitely not producing any IT or data or producing anything tangible, but I think the connections that you make with other people are just as important, if not more important.
Definitely. That's a really, really nice sentiment. Awesome. Well, thank you for joining me today. I want to ask too, for anyone who may be interested in more resources, or maybe just anyone who has any follow-up questions, are you okay if people reach out if I tag you in social media?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and if you want, I know, well, we're in different states, but I was going to say, like, I could share some resources. I don't necessarily know
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Resources outside of my bubble, but I can share those so you can put them underneath the video as well.
Yeah, that's great. We'll plan on sharing those after we jump off this recording, but
Yeah.
that sounds great. Thank you, Mel.
Yeah, of course.